Ready for another deep dive? Today, we're heading into 20th century India. We're going to uncover the story of Lal Bahadur Shastri.
A name you might not recognize right away, yeah.
But his story, his leadership, it's pretty incredible.
It really is. Talk about quiet strength, integrity. Shastri left a real mark on India.
We're lucky to have two really interesting sources for this deep dive.
Absolutely.
First up, we have C.P. Srivastava's biography.
Lal Bahadur Shastri, Life of Truth in Politics.
It seems like we'll get a really personal look at who Shastri was.
And we'll also be looking at Unhappy India.
Oh, right, by Catherine Mayo.
Yeah, it's a bit controversial.
Definitely. But that's why we're looking at both, to get a complete picture, right?
Exactly. Two sides of the same coin, you could say.
So our mission, if you will, is to go beyond the surface. Who was Shastri really? What were his values? How did he lead? And what impact did all of that have on India as a new nation?
It's a fascinating story.
Let's start at the beginning. Srivastava talks about Shastri's early life. Humble beginnings, to say the least.
He really had to fight for every opportunity, and I think those early experiences, they really shaped him.
You can see how it might make someone resourceful, resilient.
Exactly. Srivastava actually tells this great anecdote about Shastri as a boy. It shows a lot about his character. So, picture this. Young Shastri is with his uncle, right?
Yeah.
And the uncle, kind of jokingly, challenges him to catch a pigeon.
Ah, I can already see where this is going. Classic uncle move.
Right. And he's like, if you catch it, no harm will come to it. But of course
not.
Shastri, determined little guy, manages to catch the pigeon.
Oh, no.
And what does the uncle do? He decides to have it cooked for dinner.
No way. He actually went through with it.
It's more than just a meal, though, right? It's about authority, about the uncle asserting his power, even over something as simple as a playful challenge.
Wow. And Shastri, what does he do?
He's devastated, not just about the bird, but about the broken promise, the betrayal. So what does he do? He refuses to eat.
No worry.
A hunger strike at that age.
It was serious. Wow.
He's stuck to his guns for a whole day.
That's incredible. Standing up to elders like that at such a young age, you can see that strong moral compass even then.
Exactly. It's a small act, but it speaks volumes. This is a kid who values truth, justice, even when it's hard.
And to think, that commitment to his values, it only grew stronger from there.
It did. And his family's financial struggles, those played a role too, you know?
Absolutely. It wasn't an easy life.
It instilled in him this commitment to simple living, this idea of non-acquisitiveness. Values that he carried with him throughout his life, even into politics.
I wonder how much those early years, the hunger strike, the financial hardship, how much those experiences shaped his whole understanding of power.
It's a really interesting question. And, you know, that commitment to simple living, it wasn't just a personal choice for him later on.
Right.
It became a statement almost.
Like he was pushing back against something.
Exactly. Against the extravagance, the corruption he saw in the political world.
Even before he was officially in politics, he's already doing things differently.
He was.
Speaking of which, Srivastava talks about Shastri's time at Kashi Vidyapith, this national university. It seemed to have a big impact on him.
It did. Kashi Vidyapith, it wasn't your average university.
How so?
It was founded in direct response to the British education system at the time.
So a rejection of colonial influence.
Absolutely. They were all about national education, self-reliance.
Wow.
The founder, Shiv Prasad Gupta, donated half his family's wealth to start it up.
Wow. Talk about putting your money where your mouth is. That's a powerful statement.
It really was. They wanted to nurture a new generation of Indian leaders.
And Shastri was right there in the thick of it.
He was. It was at Kashi Vidyapith where his commitment to social service really blossomed. He joined the Servants of the People Society.
Which would eventually lead him into the world of politics.
It did. It was his launch pad.
It's like all these threads, all these experiences led him straight to the Servants of the People Society.
Yeah.
And that's where he meets Lala Lajpat Rai.
Right. A major figure in the Indian independence movement.
A real leader.
Yeah.
What was their relationship like?
Shastri, he really started to shine there. Lajpat Rai, he saw something special in him.
What do you mean?
Dedication, discipline. Shastri had strong principles, you know?
Yeah, we saw that early on with, well, the pigeon incident, right?
Exactly. Lajpat Rai, he trusted him with more and more responsibility within the organization.
Like a training ground, almost. Preparing him for bigger things.
You could say that. And then, of course, he officially enters the political arena.
And he's working with some major players now. Jawaharlal Nehru, for one.
Nehru, yeah. He was a giant in Indian politics.
To learn from someone like that, who had been at the forefront of India's fight for independence.
It must have been quite an experience for Shastri.
I bet. But even then, even working with someone like Nehru, Srivastava says their political views didn't always line up.
They didn't always see eye to eye, no. But there was always respect.
And Nehru, he really valued Shastri's advice.
He did. Shastri could mediate, find common ground.
Sounds familiar, right? Going back to the pigeon incident, he knew how to stand up for what he believed in. But he did it in a way that...
That didn't burn bridges, yeah.
Exactly.
And you see this again in how he handles the relationship between Nehru and Purushottam Das Tandon.
Tandon, wasn't he another big name in the Indian National Congress?
Oh, yeah. He and Nehru, they clashed a lot.
Really?
Yeah.
But Shastri, he managed to...
He was like a bridge between them, kept things from getting out of hand.
Oh. Talk about diplomacy. That takes skill.
It does, and it takes a deep understanding of people. Shastri had that. He knew how to bring people together.
He was a unifier.
He was, but he wasn't afraid to take charge either, Lead from the front when he had to.
Srivastava talks about his time as General Secretary of the UPCC.
The Uttar Pradesh Congress Committee, yeah. That was a big job.
It sounds like it. What was so important about that role?
Well, Uttar Pradesh, it's India's most populous state.
Really? I didn't realize.
So it's politically really important. Complex, too. Lots of different social groups, political factions.
I see. So for Shastri to succeed there...
It shows you his skills as an organizer, a leader.
And this was all happening as India's fight for independence was really heating up.
It was a turbulent time.
And Shastri was right there, in the midst of it all. He even ended up in prison, didn't he?
He did. Imprisoned for his activism.
Those years, those must have been tough.
They were, but they also strengthened his commitment to Gandhi's teachings. Nonviolence, self-reliance.
It wasn't just a political strategy for Shastri. It was deeper than that.
Much deeper. It was a way of life.
You can see how all these experiences prepared him for what was to come.
Absolutely.
Because he brought all of it, all those experiences, all those values, he brought them with him when he became prime minister.
Which was a critical time for India.
Finding its footing on the world stage, no easy feat. What's striking about Shastri as prime minister, I think, is that it wasn't about flash. It wasn't about charisma,
Not all.
It was quieter, more about substance, integrity.
Absolutely. This deep commitment to actually serving the people.
And Srivastava mentioned something that really surprised me. He says when Shastri died, he was actually in debt.
He was.
In debt. A prime minister.
And
how was that even possible?
He'd taken out a small loan, apparently.
For what?
To buy a family Jeep.
A Jeep? That's it? You'd think, in this day and age...
It's unheard of.
It really is.
Yeah.
He could have easily used his position, but...
He refused. Didn't want any special treatment.
He really lived by his principles, didn't he? Leading by example. But even with all that, he faced some serious challenges as prime minister. Like the food crisis, for one.
A major crisis. Food shortages everywhere.
Srivastava talks about how prices were skyrocketing, people struggling to get basic necessities.
It was a tough time. And it would have been easy for him to just
panic
or pass the buck, blame someone else. But he didn't. He got to work.
So what did he do?
He worked with state governments, set up these food zones, rationing in the bigger cities, trying to make sure everyone had enough.
A very hands-on approach.
He knew it was about more than just logistics, though. People were scared.
Of course.
He knew he had to connect with them on a human level.
What do you mean?
He knew he was asking a lot, asking people to sacrifice, so he did it too. He gave up one meal a week, every week, asked others to do the same.
Wow. To show solidarity.
Exactly. He wasn't above it.
That reminds me of the hunger strike as a kid. That willingness to sacrifice for what he believed in.
It's a pattern, isn't it? He led by example.
And the people responded to that.
They did. But the food crisis, that was just one challenge. There were language disputes, too, all across India.
Right, in Assam especially. Things could have gotten really out of control there.
They could have. And this is where you really see Shastri's skills as a mediator shine through.
How so?
He knew India couldn't afford to be divided by language, so he traveled all over, leading with people, listening to their concerns.
He wanted to understand.
He emphasized unity, working together.
Instead of forcing a solution,
he's brought people together.
Trying to build consensus.
Exactly. And then, of course, the war with Pakistan in '65.
That must have been incredibly difficult. So soon after the war with China.
It was a lot of pressure. And there was international pressure, too, to back down, avoid escalating things.
Well, Shastri decided to launch a counteroffensive.
He did. It was a risk, but he felt strongly about protecting India's sovereignty.
It was about sending a message.
In a way, yeah. And it did seem to boost morale.
So much was at stake.
Yeah.
And then, as if things weren't tense enough, China issues an ultimatum. Talk about pressure.
It's a critical moment.
What does Shastri do?
He was very measured in his response. He rejected their allegations, made it clear India would defend itself, but he also
Left the door open for diplomacy.
Exactly.
Trying to find a peaceful solution, even when
facing down two of the world's most powerful nations. And it's that commitment to peace that you see in the Tashkent Declaration, too.
the agreement with Pakistan right before his death.
Yeah. A lot of people don't realize how significant that was, laying the groundwork for better relations down the line.
It's tragic, really. He worked so hard, dedicated his life to serving India, striving for peace, and then
Gone too soon.
it makes you think about Catherine Mayo's unhappy India in a different light, doesn't it?
Mayo, right. Definitely a different perspective.
She had her criticisms of India, some of them pretty harsh.
She did. But her observations, even if you don't agree with all of them, they remind us that progress isn't always straightforward.
Exactly. There's always more to this story.
Always.
So, when you look back at Shastri's life, his legacy, what do you think is his most important contribution?
His integrity, definitely. He never wavered from his principles, even when it was difficult.
Showed the world that strength and compassion aren't mutually exclusive.
That's a powerful lesson, especially today.
It really makes you think. What would the world look like if we had more leaders like Shastri? More leaders who valued quiet strength, integrity, dialogue over division. Something to ponder, don't you think?
Something to ponder. Absolutely.